Hello everyone and welcome to Art Salon. There's a few new people here. I'm Ellie Shore and I've been organizing art salons for more than 6 years now and loving every minute of it. And I keep finding wonderful artists that I want to hear and that I think other people will want to hear as well. Suzanne Scherer and Pavel Ouporov are people who spoke in this room and gave a similar presentation. It's been updated a lot since then. We can't remember how many years ago, but I've been hoping for a long time that they would come to speak, and we finally found a time when their schedules worked out, and here they are. So Suzanne Scherer has a master's in fine arts degree from Brooklyn College and was fascinated, I believe, with painting of icons. She'll be telling you much more about that. But she wanted to study in Russia, and she applied for a grant and became the first American artist, visual arts artist, to win a very prestigious award that allowed her to go to Moscow to study. And there she met Pavel Ouporov, who was studying for his master's in fine arts at the Moscow Academy of the Arts, which was founded by Peter the Great in 1757. This was 1989. It was during the Soviet era, and they have been working collaboratively ever since. So all of the paintings that you see on the walls and out in the lobby were painted by both of them in a process that they'll be talking about. They've been recognized internationally. They've shown all over the world. They have prints in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the mezzanine in their print section. They've shown at the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress and an awful lot of wonderful places. There's a great deal more I could tell you, but I will let them tell you the rest of the story. Suzanne Scherer and Pavel Ouporov.
Hello. Thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Al because we've been talking about this forever, and Jerry for all the technical work you did to make this happen. So we've been working together, as you can see, 30 years now. This October will be officially 30 years. And we started in 1989, and I'll go through our history a little bit. This is Pavel, also known as Pasha.
It's much easier.
And this is how we used to look 30 years ago as art students. We met as graduate students in the Russian Academy. And as Ellie said, I was on an official exchange program, and it was called IREX, and it still exists. It's one of the oldest intergovernmental exchange programs between our two countries, the former Soviet Union and the United States. I was in Brooklyn College at the time, and I went to undergraduate at Florida State, where it was kind of taboo to study figurative art. I mean, if you wanted to do the figure, you were told to go into illustration, which is not what I wanted to do. So I met Philip Pearlstein, who was a visiting artist at the time, and he said, "What are you doing in Florida? You need to move to New York." So I did, and I applied to Brooklyn College, and I went there for 2 years and finished my master's degree program. And then there was a program to go to Russia, and it was, you had to write 40 pages on why you wanted to study in the former Soviet Union and then translate it into Russian, which is not a language I had any knowledge of prior to that. So I wrote and I explained my desire to study figurative art, and I also studied a lot of Russian art history in order to get this grant. And when I got it, I was surprised because, again, it was the first time an American had ever been able to study in the former Soviet Union, and they only chose 2 artists. So a friend of mine, I didn't know at the time, but I met later, he went to Yale, and he got the 1-month award, and I got the year award. Of course, they had to pick somebody who was figurative. I mean, that kind of narrowed down the possibilities and the odds, because to go there as an abstractionist, you certainly wouldn't get in the Russian Academy, because social realism was what they were doing at the time, and they still are. In any case, I was there, and I got the award in 1989. I went to Princeton and had to study 2 years of intensive Russian in 3 months. I was also debriefed by the State Department and had to learn a lot about Russian studies in a very short amount of time. So right after all of that, I came to Russia armed with a little knowledge of Russian, and I met Pasha, and this was right when we met on Red Square, of course.
We didn't meet on Red Square, but it's on Red Square.
So 1989, it was a significant time, not only for us, but for Russia and the rest of the world. It was a historical time to be in the Soviet Union under glasnost, which means opening up, and perestroika, rebuilding, when Russia was undergoing huge transformations and the formation of a new democracy. It was these political and social events that allowed our collaboration and the interaction to happen for me and to be the first American to study there. This agreement that I showed you earlier, IREX, it was signed by both Gorbachev and Reagan and supported by both governments to encourage mutual understanding through the arts. Now, there were other people on the program, mostly Sovietologists, and the Sovietologists were not happy about me being there because, and I'm talking about the American Sovietologists, because they had to get a doctorate in Soviet studies in order to get this grant. But they opened it up just for this time, for 2 years, they opened it up to visual artists, musicians, and other art forms because they believed that the arts were key in creating understanding between our two countries. So it was a really exciting time to be there. As you could see, we were very happy to meet one another, and we had we didn't speak each other's language, and that's mainly why we started working together. I'm originally from South Florida, so naturally, because this happened, there was a lot of press in the Palm Beach Post, the Fort Lauderdale News about the whole thing.
So this is how Russian Academy in Petersburg looked like. And it's a very old building, and it's built in time of Catherine the Great.
18th century.
It's 18th century. It's very kind of like a very traditional building, very beautiful inside, filled with a lot of sculptures from Greek and Roman origins. So it's absolutely fantastic place to be. Fortunately, I was studying in Moscow. It was a little bit more contemporary building, as you see. But we still had a lot of sculptures, and the art rooms, our studios, they were filled with a lot of references like plaster casts from old time, and it was fantastic time, and it was beautiful place to study.
This is the Wing Victory, and a lot of the sculptures were first edition casts from the Louvre.
It's the hallway of the school.
So they weren't, second or third generation. They were the actual first generation casts. And if you see the stained glass, that was all done by students at the turn of the century. So when you go through the hallways of the academy, you see not only great art
from the past.
Yeah, from the past, but you also
from the
see
present.
A lot of artists throughout time and the works that they did, whether it's fresco or easel painting or whatnot, and they're constantly replenishing it. So I just wanted to go back here. To be accepted into one of these schools, you would have to go through a very rigorous process. And there, I don't know if you can see, maybe you can see where Pash is in that line up there, but I'll give you a hint. Well, actually, you are wearing your Lenin pin.
It's not Lenin pin.
Who is it?
It's another pin.
Okay. All the children were required to wear Lenin pins, and oftentimes Pasha was such a rebel he refused to wear his pin. But anyway, he's the far right front there. So in order to get into the Moscow...
You know how you can recognize me?
How?
I don't wear the pioneer scarf.
Or the coat. Yeah. So in any case, the students... To get into the Moscow Art Lyceum, this is the educational, the school that leads up to the Surikov. In order to get into this one, they come from all over every republic, and you really need to start at about the age of 9 so that you can get in by 12, 11, and then you start school at 12. So it takes a lot of training. The children have to work from life, and I must say that if any of you have kids or know people who go to Dreyfus and the Arts Magnets programs here, they start really young too. I know I started my son, he's a ballet dancer now, he goes to Dreyfus, and he's got scholarships to the Boston Ballet and New York City Ballet and everywhere, but he started at 7. He started dancing just like Pasha started around that time to start drawing from life. So it's rigorous instruction, and now we're starting to do a lot of that here as well. But they only accept 50 students from all over in the former Soviet Union and all of the republics that are affiliated politically with Russia. They only take 50 from around.
Plus other countries. Like,
So-
at the time, it was Cuba, it was Syria, it was Honduras, and all kind of different things.
But he made the decision early on to prepare for this, and as a result, he had to leave at the age of 11 from the Ural Mountains, and he lived in the dormitory for the rest of until I met him. So he basically was not raised by his parents or family. He was raised by,
Himself.
Yes, himself, his classmates, and the teachers. And I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't want to give up my son at, tender age of 11. So this was the work he was doing at the time when he was probably 11 or 12. And it's
12,
it's an
12,
etching
13.
on copper plate. So they would draw directly on the copper plate and do prints from life.
I discovered the etching technique, and I was totally fell in love with that, and I started to practice, and that was my great aunt, and she was willing to pose for me, and I was very, very happy about that. And then I started. How many of you are familiar with the etching process? Okay, just okay. So you put the special ground on a plate, on a metal plate, and then you draw with the stylus, kind of like scratching out that ground. And after that, you put that into the acid. So it's a lot of variables goes into the process. And then, of course, you need to print that, know how to ink up and print that. So I was totally submerged in that process at the time. So this is the result.
Now, he comes from a very technical family. His dad worked in a factory, and they made their own printmaking press. So when I met him, they had built this printmaking press from piece by piece and transported from the Ural Mountains by train. All the rollers and all of the gear and everything they fabricated themselves in the factory. Now, when I met Pasha, he had just gotten out of the army. So it's mandatory in former Soviet Union, Yuri knows. You don't have a choice in the matter. And Pasha was arrested and put into the army. And when I say arrested, I mean because he didn't want to serve voluntarily. They came to his house and in handcuffs put him in. So at the age, what was that? How old were you? 18.
Or 19.
So I met him shortly after that, and when he was in the army, he was painting political propaganda posters in the city of
Pechi.
Pechi, okay. And
Yuri
not
knows.
far, was it Belarus? Not far from Chernobyl. So when Chernobyl happened, he could have been affected by it, but you couldn't tell the story.
Well, I was a little bit affected because I was in my studio and working as usual, and my superior just ran in and screamed, "Don't get out! Eat only canned food," and so on. So nobody knew what really happening at the time, but everybody been very scared. And about a week later, the world find out what happened. It was secret for a long time.
So his official title was Commander of Tanks, but it wasn't really the best position for him. So the generals found out early on that he had a special talent because he started doing sketches. I don't know if that was a planned thing on your part, but he started drawing sketches of the generals' daughters, and before you know it, they transferred him out of the tanks and into a studio where he did official monumental propaganda painting. So this is Surikov. So I want to give a little history. I'm not a historian, but I did study a lot of Russian art because it was important for me to understand the context within what I was inside when I was studying in the academy. But the academy was named after Surikov, and he and Rapin were the two greatest history painters in Russia in the 19th century. Prior to that, icon painting was the main form of painting in Russia for 600 years. So you have to understand that Russia was so isolated from the rest of the world. I don't even think China was as isolated as Russia was from Europe and the rest of the world. And icon painting was so integral to the development of Russian art that when Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, introduced the academy, it was all based on French methods. However, they wanted a national style of painting. So Surikov and Rapin were the two.
They came later.
Right.
They came later, but as you see, it's different style. It's very appropriate for the time. It's a very similar thing was happening in Europe and in America also.
Well, yeah, this is called Morning of the Execution of Tsar Peter I. And at that time in America, if you equate it to what we were doing with the Hudson River School, we were trying to establish our own national school of painting as well that wasn't so influenced by European concepts. Maybe the techniques were still there in terms of the academic approach, but they were looking for their own narratives, national narratives. So that's what Russia was trying to do too. So this is basically social realism is very different from.
We're jumping ahead.
Yes, we're jumping ahead now. This is what was going. Social realism was the official art of the Soviet Union. Of course, when I was there, since the revolution, this is what they were doing in the academy. So I'm skipping ahead of Malevich and Kandinsky and all the others, but this is what they were doing when I was there. This kind of work. So you can imagine being an abstract artist or a conceptual artist, that wouldn't have made it. I couldn't have gone there under those conditions. So basically they were depicting working class, factory workers, if you know a little bit of Russian history, Russian daily life, and optimistic, happy workers, and so on.
Similar here, actually.
So Mukhina was the most famous socialist realist sculptor from the Soviet era. And her work in Kolkhoz from 1937 is still standing in Moscow. And it became the logo for Mosfilm in the Soviet-sanctioned cinema. I studied, and Pasha studied with the grandson. And he was also in the academy. And it's significant to note that women were in the workforce very equal at this time under communism. And it started right after the 1917 revolution, unlike here, which came much later. So. So this is the academy. There's me in the Ecorche room. This is really why I wanted to be in Russia, because even after 6 years of higher education in the arts, I felt like I lacked something. I really wanted to draw and paint like the Russians, because I saw an exhibition at the New York Academy when I was at Brooklyn College, and I also studied at the New York Academy. I saw an exhibition of Russian art that I couldn't believe these 16, 18-year-olds were drawing like Leonardo. And I really wanted to know how to do that because I come from a family of physicians, and I really wanted to. I always respected technique and understanding of anatomy and form. At one point, wanted to be a medical illustrator. So that just felt right to me. So I love that Ecorche room. So if any of you don't know what Ecorche is, it's flayed muscles. So that's like a part of the education. You're in the anatomy room, and these are drawings from the students. And the teacher, the instructor there, is a doctor who has his training in anatomy, plastic anatomy, and they do dissections.
Medical anatomy.
Much like Leonardo.
Plus the artistic anatomy.
So you really have to want to be there. You have to want to learn figurative representational art to
this is
study
typical
there.
Student work for
like a 20-year-old. And this is fifth year. This is easel painting, fourth year. So the way it works in the academy, it's step by step, much like in any 19th century academy. The first year, you're drawing head and hands, and at that time, you can only do head and hands portraits, and then you're looking at the skull, you're looking at the crochet and plaster, Greek and Roman plaster casts also of the head and hands. Second year, you graduate to three-quarter. Third year, you're at full portrait. Fourth year, you're doing more complex compositions in an environment. And then fifth year is diploma, right? Fifth year is diploma, or sixth. Okay. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Yuri, because you went through this, right? This is fourth year monumental painting, and this is the institute when I was there. So these were student works. And you could see how grounded they are in art history and in technique. It was fun. It was really fun to see that.
And that is the typical hallway in art school. So this wall probably would be next year we'll just chiseled out and repainted with the new diploma work. So every time it was changing because sometimes we have lack of walls.
So this is Moscow rooftops from 1989. This is what Pasha was doing when I met him, and he was a printmaking major. He was not a painting major. I was a painting major. He was in the graphic department, and he would work directly on copperplate from life. So he was crazy, as he is now. He would go on the rooftops and actually draw out in the snow and in bad weather and climb on top of these rooftops. And he fell a few times to the dismay of his mom, who had to come from the Ural Mountains to help him out. But yeah, he would work overlooking Red Square. You could see the Kremlin over there in St. Basil's.
Yeah, it's right there. It's Red Square. It's where I grew up. That is my neighborhood.
So in the Soviet Union, in the academy rather, you could just produce 3 pieces per semester. Per year. Unlike here, where you have to do like 12 to 15 projects for every class you're in. So it was great to be there and be able to slow down. This was the first drawing I ever did from life. I mean, I didn't have that in my education here. We didn't even have figure drawing at Florida State. We drew from photos. We didn't have it. So yeah, that was my first drawing. And when I first got to the academy, they did not want me to be there. And I was in shock. How could I have gotten into this program with Reagan and Gorbachev signing it and having this official exchange program? Apparently it didn't get down to the teachers that I was coming, but the head of the academy knew, and so did the people in the government. They knew, but they didn't want me there. And I was like, what is going on? Why are they not letting me in the classroom? And I figured out later they didn't know what I was doing. So I showed them a portfolio of my works, and all of a sudden everything changed. They said, oh my God, Americans doing figurative art. How is this possible? Because they thought all Americans were abstractionists or conceptual artists. They immediately didn't want me to, distort the thinking or add anything different than what they were teaching. So this was my drawing from a model, Ivan Ivanovich. And this is Pasha's of the same model. An etching, of course, with his Pravda newspaper. So this is an etching Pasha did of flies when I met him. And I didn't know Pasha prior to this piece. I wanted to find out who he was because he was quite a troublemaker. He had been in that system too long, in his opinion, and he was just trying to break all the rules, not following the assignments, not doing what he was asked to do. And when he did this piece, he was banned from printmaking for 30 days. And I was like, who is this guy? I have to meet him. So I was introduced to him, and we've been together ever since.
So that was my answer to, okay, you have assignment to copy. So each individual thing, can you go to the next one, please? So you see each one, it's same plate, but printed so many times. So that is answer to copy. So it's copying, 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 and something very insignificant, like a fly. And on top of that, you're supposed to copy somebody very grand, like Rembrandt or Dürer or Piranesi or somebody else at that.
Or some great Russian artist.
From all time. And I didn't do that. I just copied myself. So it was slap in kind of like in the face for them.
Is that one plate or?
It's one plate.
Okay.
It's one plate, wiped in, printed, then wiped again, printed again, and it's.
Oh my, that's impressive.
So he was up all night, needless to say, because each one had to be aligned. If you know, it would be etching.
Everything have to be perfectly aligned. Everything have to be perfectly wiped, to the perfection.
So this is an example of one of his poster designs, because that was what they were doing, and everything, of course, was done by hand because they didn't do anything digitally back then. I don't think we did here either. So yeah, so they did everything. That's letraset.
Yeah.
So he was making a commentary, of course, about how, what are we going to do with all the monuments and the things that are being torn down. And you'll see later we did a piece.
History and culture and how it was destroyed during the revolution. And again, the revolution happened at the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that was my answer for that theme.
So yeah, this is someone else's poster. Mick Moskva. McDonald's was just opened when I got there. And I don't like McDonald's normally, I must admit, but I was really hungry in Russia. So I stood in line. That was the line I stood in. And it took 2 hours to get in there. And I have to say, it did taste a lot better over there. And I don't know if it was because they used more natural ingredients and not the fillers and preservatives. Probably it was too expensive for them to afford soy and all the preservatives, or whatever they put in them here. But it tasted better. It could have been that I was just starving. I lost 25 pounds when I was there because there wasn't any food to be found. You'd go in the stores, and they were empty. You go looking for eggs, wait for line 2 hours for eggs, and they would run out.
You know, the closest will be during the hurricane. You're going to your local place.
Yeah, it was like the hurricane here.
And nothing on the shelves.
But it was like that all the time. And only Americans and foreigners could get food in the special stores, the Berioska. It's a special store for foreigners, and I could go in there. But my stipend was in rubles. I only had 400 rubles, which was 4 times what the Soviets were getting. So I was privileged in that way, and I was kind of ashamed for it. So I just lived like everybody else and stood in line. And this is from
Meat. Yeah.
Line for
Store for
myasa.
meat.
Myasa means meat. 1990, this was taken, and that's how it was the whole time I was there. So this is 1989, and Lenin was everywhere, and there's me next to Lenin. He was at the time. Every public building, every subway station, every school, there was a picture or a bust of Lenin.
This is the facade of a library.
That was, yeah. So this is our first exhibition together, 1991. We had been working together for 2 years by that time in the academy, and the word got out to the teachers, to people who were in culture, that what we were doing. So we were asked to give a show at it's called the New Tretyakov Gallery, Central House of Artists. And at that time, there were not any foreigners allowed to exhibit in the former Soviet Union. Nobody from the West or anywhere else, so for that matter. So we were very excited about it. I'm not so certain we were ready for a show, but we did it. And when we did the show, then, of course, my parents, they called the press over here. They were really good at that. And it got covered in the Fort Lauderdale News. So this was a painting of a metro worker. That's actually a portrait of his mom.
So the idea of this particular artwork was...
We'll go back.
Yeah. You see it's different panels, but a little bit later you will see a slide when the work is assembled into sculpture, so you can walk around. So it's not just a painting, it's also have sculptural aspect to it, right? And the outside panel, and then the glass, and then the portrait behind it. So it was we were trying to do something on different levels, right? And I'm not exactly how to translate constructor. Maybe Yuri can help me. Constructor, okay. So it's kind of like the kids kind of play with, it's like a Lego, right?
Oh, toy, okay.
It's like a toy. How to build a milliman, how to build a metro worker, and so on. So that was the idea.
We'll show you later as I go through. There's actually a painting of a militiaman. They were positioned everywhere, so they were watching you. There were booths. If anybody's been to the former Soviet Union, there were booths that watched over people. Much like police, but they were sitting in there looking at you in the subway, everywhere on the streets. So that was one of the first things I noticed besides, armed militiamen were the booths, So this is our show at the Tretyakov, very official. The guy on the right is the director of the Tretyakov. The guy on the left, the Soviet Art Foundation. Art Fund.
Foundation, yes.
And at the same time, on the second floor was James Rosenquist's exhibition. And that is his son, John, who I've known forever. He's the same age as I am, and I met him here because his dad had a studio. He just died recently, but he had a studio in Arapika. And we used to go and visit his dad a lot at that time. And it was coincidental that we were able to bump into each other in Moscow, and fortunate for us because there weren't any lights to be found to light the exhibition.
The spotlights.
So Rauschenberg had come right before Rosenquist, and Rosenquist wasn't happy about that a bit because he and Rauschenberg were always rivals, and he didn't like being second to Rauschenberg. So Rauschenberg said, okay, Jim, I'll let you borrow my lights. And then I asked Jim, could we borrow your lights too? And that's how we lit our show. But these were really tough times in Russia. Not only was there not food, there were so many things you couldn't find. You couldn't get light bulbs. You couldn't get just basic things like, of course, art supplies. So we painted with gasoline. We couldn't get turpentine. There were deficits of everything. So this was our show, and this is the first, we were on the ground floor. This was called Conversation, the first painting we ever did together. And they're self-portraits, influenced in a way by Gilbert and George. We really liked their work at the time. And it's in the letters are in Cyrillic and in Latin, English letters in gold. That's the piece. I mean, whatever. And this is another one of our first paintings we did together. When we first met, instead of looking at differences, we were trying to find out what we had in common. And at that time, we both had experienced loss for the first time of a grandparent. And so we made these funerary portraits similar to Holbein, the painting by Holbein, self-portraits, and a doorway on the top and then the lid of a coffin on the other to form a cross. So it's sort of like east, west, looking in and covering and looking in, life, death, male, female. And that was the
that
ground
was our
floor,
room. Yeah.
one of our areas that we exhibited in. And here's an etching we did based on that same theme. And there's funerary prayers. I was raised Catholic, so the funerary prayer in English on the top, and then in Russian for the Russian Orthodox prayer, very similar to the Catholic prayer. And these prints are in the Library of Congress. So here's the militiaman painting we were discussing earlier. And it could be shown as compartmentalized, it could be constructed or separately exhibited. Okay, that's oil on canvas. And then we moved to New York. Well, we didn't move at that time. We were just visiting in 1991. And this was self-portraits we did when we were staying in New York. And this, 1992, we did this piece. There was a show at the Columbus Museum of Art on Gorbachev.
We were invited to do that show, to participate. It's a group show, but it was a particular theme about Gorbachev under the glass or something. Whatever.
Glasnost under glass.
Yeah, and that was our answer. So it's my self-portrait in the hallowing mask of Gorbachev.
So we became very active in the Russian cultural community in New York City because that's where I was living. And we were in New York for 15 years prior to moving here to Florida. This piece was influenced by the Sots art movement. And there were a lot of other artists in the show, like Komar Melamed and a lot of the top Sots art artists at the time. We were not very political, but we wanted to participate and say something about our experience. So that's what we did. So about that time in 1991 was the Moscow coup putsch, and we were in New York City, and we watched this on TV, and we all of a sudden had an epiphany, what would happen to Pasha if he went back to Moscow during this time? Because Yeltsin was in the White House, and Gorbachev was imprisoned in his dacha. So we thought, we better wait
it out.
We better think about this. Let's not go back to Russia. So instead, we went to City Hall. And that was 1991. And we've been married ever since. So again, our favorite press people in South Florida like to cover all of that and our opinion on it. That was 1991. And Pasha had this obsession with death for some reason. And it wasn't just because of our grandparents. I think he has a dark side to him, which comes out of people from Eastern Europe. No offense, Yuri. But we decided, since he moved to New York, we were going to have a funeral every year in a different cultural tradition. So Pasha, you can tell him what you did. He almost
Okay,
caused
the
Mom to
first-
have a heart attack, but that's what he did.
So the first one, this is the newspaper. I went to Russian newspaper and I placed myself my
It's obituary.
my own obituary, and actually that was invitation for the performance I had in my house. So. And I got to, it wasn't just, it wasn't about person who died, artist who died. And it was very specific text that artist who died, not the person. But so many people misread that, and they got so offended because they start to call her and saying, condolences, oh, so sorry. And she said, oh, no, come over.
So we were looking at Peter Greenaway's movie, The Cook,
that
the Thief,
was
his
second
wife
year.
and her lover. And we loved that movie. It made such an impact on us. So we had another funeral party for Pasha in the East Village at the Anyway Cafe. This Anyway Cafe was really a famous little cafe where all the Russians and Eastern Europeans went. So we had a party there, and Pasha had to lie. It was very cold, by the way, like in March. And we put fruits and vegetables on his body, and then we made a corpse and with wax. Cast body of Pasha.
Copy.
Plaster cast with wax and meat.
It looks like cooked meat. So I was uncooked. It was cooked version of me right next to me.
And then the next year we did a Viking funeral party, and we rented this boat on the east.
Not this boat. It's a big boat, actually.
No, it was a real boat.
Not this boat.
And
This
we
boat
had a party
made
on
it.
the boat on the Hudson River, and we took bows and arrows and sent Pasha's corpse out to sea. And the fire department came, by the way. So around that time, Komar Melamed started this project, this monumental propaganda project. And they invited artists to their studio in Soho to discuss what to do with the Soviet monuments after the coup. So we were involved in these meetings, and a lot of the artists in the village and in Soho would go to these meetings and come up with some collective response to what could be done, because after the coup, all these statues were lying around Gorky Park.
They were just taking, like it was the same thing it was in Iraq, like Hussein was taken out and put it in the garbage, and the same thing was with the Soviet symbols. So they would take those sculptures and just break them on the ground.
So we decided that our idea, you could see our proposal here, and this is how Komar Melamed did the
Komar
display
Melamed at the
for
bottom,
everybody.
The top is our response. So
We decided to have a funeral. A funeral for it's called the Project, can you read it? For the monuments of the, I can't even read my own.
Well, anyway, it
title.
was very sarcastic response. Very sarcastic response. So we modeled that after what would happen during the funeral of some Soviet leader, right? So it was a minute, like hour by hour, minute by minute, what would be happening. But instead of the leader, it would be those monuments, and not just one monument. It would be all of them. So it was totally different way of taking. So this is what you will find right now.
In Gorky Park.
So it's how they were. So instead of laying down like this, we decided to make still kind of like, you respect those things, because first of all, it's some artists work on it, right? So you still respect at least craftsmanship. And then
history. You want to
Right.
remember the history. So we just proposed to bury them on Red Square in coffins. And this was at the World Financial Center, and this was
those are displays.
1993, I believe it was.
It was covered with glass, and then it will be some material shown on those displays. And this you don't see right.
So
right
it was a good exhibition for us, because here we were just starting out in New York, and we hadn't even had a solo show yet. So that was a good way for us to get our work into museums all over the world, because Komar Melamed initiated it, and so many people were involved, like Art Spiegelman, as you could see in the New Yorker. A lot of people were involved in that. So right after that, the word spread about what we were doing through Komar Melamed, and Mimi First Gallery invited us to have a solo show. This was our first show we ever had in the U.S., in New York City, and this was 1994. It's called Iconus Bestiarius.
Everything was based on bestiary of
Medieval
17th
bestiary.
century or 16th century. I don't remember.
12th to 16th century. So that was a great time to live in New York because in the 90s, not only did the shows sell out, it didn't hardly matter what you were doing, everything sold. It was unbelievable. It's not like that anymore, of course, but there were crowds to get into the gallery and red dots on every painting. It was unbelievable. You could actually live from your art, and it's definitely not like that now. But it was great to be a part of that at the time. So this was based on, the cover of the catalog was based on Arculon, which is a beautiful old fossil in Yale that we made an etching of. So one of the paintings was featured on the cover of the Sciences, and that's Pasha in the center, and I'm on the bottom right there, Family of Apes. This is when we started to do exclusive egg tempera paintings, and we'll show the process later. You can see there's 2 paintings here in tempera and oil paintings as well. But that's pretty much what people know us by as our egg tempera work. So this is when we started. It was in that show in 1994. And that was very much based on the method of icon painting. About that time, someone had seen our show, the Sarnoffs. They were a couple, husband and wife team, who co-authored books together. And they were psychologists at NYU. And they wanted to write about artists who collaborate. And not only just collaborate, but who also have a romantic relationship, whether it's a marriage or girlfriend or whatever. Christo and Jean-Claude were in the book, and many, many other people like us who worked together. So it was a good book because it finally brought to light that this has been going on for some time and that there are more people that do it than you know.
But main focus wasn't on art. It was on personal relationships. So it's
psychology book. It's in the psychology section if you go to the bookstore. So we were really interested, as you know, Pasha was interested in funerary traditions. We also got involved in shamanism. And I wanted to, I'm not going to read it now, but John Berger wrote a lot about the emigre experience and in depth about how one feels dislocated and their world becomes chaotic. I felt that Pasha had sort of find himself in this new world, and he didn't even speak the language, so it was like a healing process. He had to first die a death of his own culture, and that's why the death series we did, because it was sort of saying goodbye to Russia, saying goodbye to his past, starting over, death to the past, and then the shamanist piece were healing that process, that wound of moving from one completely different country to another, completely different background and political structure and lifestyle. So this is a Siberian shaman that we were looking at for that piece. I forgot to say, this was called Gallery Palto, which means coat in Russian, and he would walk around displaying our art pieces in his coat.
Not me. It was the gallerist actually. He owned that coat, and it's conceptual piece. So basically, he's a conceptual artist exhibiting somebody's work in his coat. And that piece was created for Berlin Art Fair.
So this is a show that we did in 1999, jumping ahead. We were already living in the U.S., and Pasha's mom had just passed away. And it was hard for him to even do art, but I made sure that we did a commemorative show about her. So all these pieces were based on her life. They were etchings, and we wrote, right before she died, she wrote a thank you poem about all the things in her life that she was appreciative of. And we decided, we didn't know, though, that she was going to die right after the poem. So we went back to all the cities she lived in and wrote the poem on the streets.
On the pavement, like this is the text on the pavement.
On Red Square. He tried, but he was held back, so he just showed the poem.
And what is interesting about this situation, this is the first museum she took me to.
The Ekaterinburg Museum of Fine Arts.
Yeah, so we approached that museum, explained our idea, and they really liked that.
So they're all images of her in different contexts. The one on the right is inside the Florida banyan tree, because she did come to Florida, actually, and visited us here before she passed away. Again, these are our bone pieces. We used to get roadkill when we first moved to Florida from New York, and like whether it was a tortoise on the side of the road, we would bury it and then reconstruct it after it was clean. And all this is painted with egg tempera. And the little painting of Pasha, the self-portrait there, is also tempera.
Our refrigerator was filled with this.
Yeah, and that's the underbelly of the same tortoise. So again, we're thinking about shamanic things, about the Kabbalah we read a lot of. There's a scheme of the tree of the Sephiroth, and the tree is a theme that runs through all of our work. So we never have been very political artists. We've been more about looking inward and looking at different cultures and different belief systems and mythology. This is called Regeneration from the Center, and we were looking at the symbolism of numbers. And it's a self-portrait of me in egg tempera, and the rest of the painting is tempera as well. And you can see our printmaking influence, because all that's done engraving style, almost like a textile or a print, with a quill pen. So this is the first of our series that we showed at Mimi First Gallery in 1991. And this is based on dreams. We started to do a whole series on dreams of our friends and family.
We start to collect dreams, we start to share dreams, and other people start to share their own dreams, and we decide to do the portraits of them, to depict actual person inside of what they're describing.
So this is the Moscow Kremlin, and I'm showing you this to show you just the concepts behind some of the works. Even though our work is not liturgical in any way, we both studied icon painting in Russia.
Still certain symbolism coming from that tradition, and we apply the usage of certain colors, certain composition, certain technique, and also procedure, how we apply our paint on a board or on a canvas or whatever it is.
This is called a klad, which is the protective cover of the icon. So when you see here, this is Rublev, on the famous Russian icon painter, it would be covered with this. So this is something
to protect, to give thanks to that embellishment. It's not just a decorative thing. It's kind of like giving thanks to that particular icon, because somebody believed that that particular piece of art save their soul or something.
So this is from 1998. It's called Tree Gate, and that was also at Mimi First Gallery. So for, I think, 3 to 5 years, we had solo shows each year at Mimi First Gallery, and it was a really good situation for us at the time. This is called, it's Prince Mikhail, can't even pronounce it, from the 17th century, but it's a parsuna, which means
it's the first art was produced in Russia, depicting not the saint or some kind of religion situation, theme. That was real person.
So this is what was being done in Europe at the same time. So the reason we showed that to you is to show how the development of Russian art was so very different. Because prior to this parsuna portrait of some prince, it was all iconic in nature, and it was only biblical. Meanwhile, in Europe, with van der Weyden and Van Eyck, they had...
Well, it's still religious, but it's a different approach.
They looked at nature. They started to look outward, whereas Russia was still looking inward. So here's some more examples of egg tempera, which is what we love, the process of egg tempera, and that's what we teach, and we've been teaching it since we started working together 30 years ago. And in the US, we didn't really have much tempera painting up until about the 1950s, when these books were translated by Daniel Thompson. He translated Cennino Cennini's Craftsman's Handbook from the early Renaissance, and that brought the method of tempera painting into the US. And so people like Paul Cadmus, Wyeth, all these people started to paint in tempera for the first time. So we're very interested in keeping the connection to the past in terms of techniques and materials. So even though our work is, contemporary, we still like to have a touch with the past, and we formed a circle of tempera painters across the U.S. that we're in touch with, and we exhibit together and we lecture together, and because there aren't that many of us, really. So this is Robert Vickery. He had a show at the Boca Museum of Art a few years back. I don't know if any of you saw it, but he's a part of the Magic Realist along with George Tooker. So this is Petrus Christus, Madonna of the Dry Tree, and that influenced us to do this piece. So that was a part of our Dream series. Okay, this is called Labyrinth, a portrait of my brother inside his dream. And that was featured in a book called Dreams 1900 to 2000. And this book featured artists who depicted dreams.
Then we started interested in terms of technique, we started interested in polychromy. And that was experimental piece for us. That is carved wood and gold leaf.
That we showed at the Coral Springs Museum a few years back. I'm not sure what year that was. 2000. 2000 maybe?
It's carved wood and then gold leaf.
It's called polychromy. It's carved solid wood and then gilded.
So all this berry leaf, it's carved wood.
Sorry.
And that is the painting in it. So it's one surface, but it's like a sculpture.
There was a show in New York at the Met of Tilman Riemenschneider, and he was a Renaissance artist who did polychromy. It was a whole show of him.
Most prominent artist who worked in that
from
that
Germany,
technique.
and it was so phenomenal. That's what got us interested in trying to do the same thing.
We wanted to try.
So then in 2004, we started to do the Celestial Alphabet series. I believe it's out, and I have it there depicted. I mean, it's hanging out there on an easel.
Oh, yeah, this one, yes.
It's called Messenger, and it was a preoccupation we had with linguistics because our son had been born 2 years prior to that, and as he formed his first sentence, his first sounds and vowels and pronunciations, we started to get interested in linguistics, and we've found out about the Celestial Alphabet, which is an ancient alphabet based on the stars and supposed to be the original language of the Garden of Eden. It's not a language, it's an alphabet. So we put that in a lot of our works.
And it's based on constellations, based on stars. So that's why it's a round shape.
So this one's called Twilight, and we've always been fascinated by the Florida banyan trees. The concept of as above, so below, that ancient dictum that what's above is also below, and that it's like an Ouroboros echoing the heavens on earth and vice versa. It's like a reflection, a mirror image. So we had this show at Auburn University, which was probably one of the best. The way they presented it was one of the best shows we've had.
That is the museum. That is the actual place.
And they published that catalog. And we did it. Along with painting, we also do printmaking, drawing, installation, and we did video. And this video is called Tree Rain, and we exhibited it first at MoCA, at the Museum of Contemporary Art, as a part of the, what was that thing? What was that competition? You guys know, everybody knows what it is. Yeah, the consortium, yeah. It was the consortium at MoCA. And we did this, that's the Fort Lauderdale banyan tree at Birch State Park that was brought over, I believe, by Thomas Edison. And we did a video on a loop of all the words in multiple languages that relate to the M sound linguistically. Andre Bielli
wrote the piece. It's based on, he covered pretty much every sound, and we choose M sound because it's very mortuary sound, and that sound, it was very close to us because our son was producing that sound at the time.
Like mama, home, womb. So Andre Bielli looked at linguistics, and he saw that similar consonants or sounds or letters have important symbolic meaning that are interconnected between cultures. So we were focusing on the M sound, because mama, womb, home. And dome in Russia is home. So here are some of our photos and paintings. This is the Tree of Life. And all the little round paintings are tempera works.
So that is the actual scheme. That is celestial alphabet.
Which we did an etching of.
Then the same scheme is an etched glass. Actually, it's not etched, it's engraved glass. And we installed the painting behind it. The reason why we did that, because when you're walking and see the shadows casting from the glass, it's all of a sudden it's becoming alive. It's not just a very static painting, but it's becoming a little bit kinetic movement over there. So it's kind of like a little subtle, but still we had to try.
So this is an egg tempera painting with the same concept of the celestial alphabet.
That is
detail.
the detail.
So a lot of our work is self-portraits or portraits of family and friends. We find that painting models, it's a different experience for us. We like it to be about that psychology or story or narrative about the person that we're depicting. Much like Sally Mann, our work has always been about very personal. This is Pasha inside a banyan tree that no longer exists. And after the hurricane, I think it was Wilma.
Yes. We've been working with photography all our life, right? But even though we did just recently start to realize that whatever we're doing for a painting, it's already could be used as standalone photograph, because it's we're composing that, we're thinking about the composition, we're thinking about what kind of mood you want to put into, and then as a reference, we're using that for painting. And then we decide, why not to try? Why not to try our photography? This is the
same image as a silver point drawing with gold leaf on the back. So it's mylar and
very similar to this.
like this
drawing.
one.
Same technique.
And again, photos that we exhibited as well. And this no longer exists. So it's almost, they're like homages or kind of like memorials to these trees. So I'm really glad that we were able to get them before the hurricane took them down.
That tree was very, very unusual. Probably during the previous hurricane, it's fall down and regrew itself. So that became a ladder.
We call it Jacob's Ladder. So this is called Hands of My Mother, and it's based on a poem by Susan Griffin, a poet who we really like, and she says in her poem, "I know I am made from this earth, as my mother's hands were made from this earth, as her dreams came from this earth, and all that I know in this earth. The body of the bird, this pen, this paper, these hands, this tongue speaking, all that I know speaks to me through the earth, and I long to tell you, you who are earth too, and listen as we speak to each other of what I know. The light is in us." So this is a self-portrait of me and my son Nicholas. I had lost my brother right before I did this painting, and it just seemed really appropriate to write this poem and incorporate it into the piece.
The poem written on the roots, so all those words in the roots.
And here's a photo from that same time period at Birch State Park with the celestial alphabet superimposed.
And it's public park, so it was guerrilla situation. Strip it down and
Quick. And then a painting based on the same concept, same photo. And that's egg tempera. Now, we did a lot of self-portraits when we were in our 20s. We stopped doing that lately. And this is the same tree. So our next exhibition after the Mimi First was Jenkins Johnson Gallery in New York City, 2006. And everything was based on the Tree of Life and Gustav Klimt. And we constructed this Tree of Life similar to Gustav Klimt's out of cut vinyl. On the computer, we digitally drew it and then printed it out. So it could be easily transposed to any collector's home or another museum.
Or it can grow. If you,
Or it can get bigger.
if you need to go a little
Right.
wider, you can just add a little bit more, and it's.
So the Tree of Life has always been a big motif of ours, and we love the way in Siberia and Eastern cultures they have these prayer trees with hanging things, hanging pieces of people's clothing. So when you go there, you leave a piece of your own clothing as a sort of homage to you being there in this sacred space. So we decided to do something similar when we were instructors at FAU, and we had these hanging silks, and much in that same fashion as the video, we had multiple languages with the meditation on the letter M, like home, womb, dome, and all those other words that we had in the video. We constructed
We like the
silk
idea
screened,
that you
actually.
can walk into and being surrounded by that environment. So it's all of a sudden it's becoming like hum of those words around you. It was quite interesting experience.
So now here we are up to 2007. This is the Coral Springs Museum of Art, and that was our first solo exhibition in a museum here in Florida. It was called One Voice, where we showed that video, and we did a prayer tree, and people would write their wishes. Actually, it was a wishing tree, and they would write their wishes on these sea grape leaves. And that's the rest of the installation. And again, we were able to show this piece again. That was at Jenkins Johnson here at the Coral Springs Museum. And it was based on, no, in New York, but we also showed it at Coral Springs. And it's also at St. Andrew's School in Boca. And here's what it was based on. And that's St. Andrews. And here we had the students actually make prints, and they were in middle school, and took block prints, and those are their pieces on the tree. So here's just showing you the different influences that we were looking at the time, where the tree of life is depicted in many cultures.
It wasn't just Klim. Klim based his spirals on previous generations, and
So there's I don't know if anybody's been there, but the Neue Gallery in New York does phenomenal shows, and they had a Gustav Klimt exhibition and a book published, and they incorporated this piece into the book. And shortly after that, we had a show at the Evansville Museum of Art and Sciences, and that's our son Nicholas. And a lot of the same work traveled from the Noyer and Jenkins Johnson to this show. So that was called Talking Tree. And here's more from the same series. And this one is called Dream of the White Peacock. And this was the beginning of another series we started called Language of the Birds. We started to become interested in universal mythologies, fairy tales, and iconography from German fairy tales, Russian, American, all over the world. And a lot of it was partly because of our son being interested in fairy tales at that time. So one of his favorite animals was the peacock, particularly the white peacock.
And also the idea of how kids at a certain age, they are able to communicate with a different level, totally different level than adults, with animals and with nature. And that was pretty much understanding like language of the birds. So they can speak to the birds, right? But over the years, we getting hardened and couldn't get into anymore.
So we were interested in depicting children and adolescents at that time, and their fragility, their innocence, and their creative potential, and also the idea that they had this timeless quality or mysterious understanding of nature that somehow we had lost, and that those little gems that we put in their mouth was symbolizing that connection between the children and nature. And we did that in the form of a silver point as well. So this is all from the Language of the Birds series. And a lot of the birds that we would see in Florida, just going to the bird walks and, the zoo. So here's one of our influences, the unicorn tapestries. And this is called Language of the Birds. And each of their mouths is a little ruby. And she's holding a ruby too. I don't know if you can see, to symbolize the connection between, that mystical connection between them. And you see a lot of that in fairy tales, too, that the children have some kind of special connection with nature. A silver point from the same series.
Usually how we work, we do a silver point drawing and then live with that for a little while, and then we do the painting.
And this is called Tsarina Swan.
Right over there?
Oh, yeah, right there. It's egg tempera and semi-precious gems on poplar. And we should probably show them a little bit about the panel. This is the Wilton diptych, and that led to this one, this deer piece. Some of you may have seen it at Armand Bowling. And it's also done with beadwork, which was a new technique that Pasha had come up with, using a little needle and putting all the little beads.
It's not new technique. It's just...
Well, for us, it's new. I just wanted to show. this, if you can see how this is constructed, it's much like an icon panel. And you have to, it's constructed out of solid
wood.
poplar.
It's solid wood
so you
poplar.
have to put strips
You put
here.
the braces, so the wood panel have to breathe. So the brace is preventing from warping. So it's part of the.
I'll just put it back here. But anyway, you can look at it later. There's little beads on the bottom that represent that technique. And I wanted to say also that the red clay is symbolic, that goes around the whole panel. That comes straight out of icon painting.
It's representing the earth, became from earth. And the panel itself, because it's carved a certain way, we're using icon panels in this situation. And it's representing kovcheg, which is also English will be Noah's Ark. So it's kind of like receiving vessel.
About this time, Nicholas decided to get into ballet. And this was his first ballet teacher, a Russian teacher in Miami that was his main teacher at the time. And it's called Future Self. It's in 2011 we painted this. He had seen Billy Elliot on Broadway and decided that's what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. And there's a scene, I don't know if any of you have seen Billy Elliot, the movie or the Broadway play, but there's a scene in Billy Elliot where the young Billy is dancing with the older Billy. And so this is why we called it Future Self, because when we saw this teacher of his, we could imagine one day our son would be like him, because that's what he was aspiring to be. And if any of you have seen pictures of Nicholas on Facebook or online, he does look like that Andre, which is kind of eerie to think that when we painted this, he would one day, as he now does, look like that. It's quite remarkable how time flew. So this is called, by John Fitzgerald, Fairy in a Bird's Nest, and that led to this scheme and painting.
This is the kind of like our kitchen.
This is how we work.
It's how we work.
Well, let's go back.
So before we would start working on the painting, we will do sketches. Usually it's kind of like on a napkin and something kind of like whatever coming to grab on. And then when the ideas start to crystallize, we start to do the photo shoots, start to gather different visuals, and we assemble them together as one piece. And the pink lines, it's how we plan our composition. So each crossing of the lines, it's a point of interest. It's where we're placing our compositional elements.
So we look at the armature of the rectangle and sacred geometry, Pythagorean numerology, and much of the Renaissance artworks, as many of you may know, are based on geometric compositions, based on music and mathematics. So we were looking at where the intersections are. It actually it's a musical scale. So we try to use a lot of these historic compositions in our work when we're doing our pieces. So that's how it started out, just a quick sketch of Nicholas with the bird's nest, the underpainting.
Then going refined. So as you notice, in the beginning we did, can you come back?
Yeah.
Please. In the beginning we were playing this particular pose, but later on we start to talk about, and we didn't want that kind of like Christ reference to it too much, right? So
again, he has that gem in his hand, and so does the Anhinga, sort of representing that mystical connection we were thinking about in this whole series. And at that time, he was really good at origami, and we put the origami almost in all of our paintings because we felt that it represented in a way, like the swan here, that mathematical part of the art that we were trying to symbolize as well, and that children were able to pick up on that too, that sculpture and mathematics in their work.
And actually, in the foliage and in the painting, it's a lot of activity between the leaves, between the flowers and things.
So this is a picture of our studio. We work in a typical house. We don't have a special art studio. We have 4-bedroom house, and 1 bedroom's his to work in, his studio, and mine's in the other, and then we cross paths when we feel like it. So here he's working on a painting and us together, and then the final step is drilling into the painting. and I let him
To
do
put
that
the
part.
gems, you have to drill.
I don't like doing that part. It's too scary. Yeah.
I tried so many different fine tools, like jewelry tools, and I found just good old drill worked the best.
These are all from the same series, Fireflies. And this is based on Whistler's Peacock Room. In our painting, everything was carved out of the wood panel and gilded. So we look a lot at art history and Russian fairy tales. This is from a Russian fairy tale, The Firebird. You can see the scheme in the gilded part. And this is called The Golden Thread. And we were thinking about the idea of a fairy tale once again with the Florida banyan tree, and she's holding a little platonic solid, actually. We were always interested in platonic solids and
crystal,
the symbolism of the platonic solid. And then there's a golden thread that connects her to the earth through that.
Interesting thing happened to this painting. One night I thought about what to do about this painting, and I painted very detailed, hundreds and hundreds of little hummingbirds around her.
It was horrible. It looked like they were mosquitoes.
You know, to bring kind of a little dark side, little horror to the picture, like one bird, it's so, but when you have hundreds of them, it's becoming very, very, very strange.
Sometimes we have disagreements about the work, but they're still in there kind of subtly, like he put varnishes over it. They're still kind of there.
They're gone.
Okay.
They flew away.
Okay. Sometimes I get my way, but not always. So this one's called Arabian Dance, and we started to do a lot of paintings of dancers around this time. As our son matured in his dance abilities and we saw all of his friends in the dance schools, every one of these paintings from now on, I think from now on that you'll be seeing are images of dancers that we know from his circle. And this is called Arabian Dance, and it's based
older and older.
Yes. And soon they'll be in college, and we're going to have to find new models. So this is that painting was inspired by Bakst, who is a costume designer from the Ballet Russe. This is 1912. And this is called Lauren, 2015. It's another dancer, sort of nutcracker costume.
This painting is very small. It's only, 12 by 12?
It's out front there.
Oh, is it? Good.
Mm-hmm. And again, egg tempera, because that's our main medium. And this was an egg tempera piece we showed at Armand Bowling Fine Art recently, so we're getting close to the end of our lecture. And that was the opening.
Here's the model.
And the model who we painted is right beside it. And here's the installation view. And we also showed it at a gallery that no longer exists, unfortunately, Sirona Fine Art. It was in Hollandale. Quite a nice figurative gallery. It was very sad when they closed.
And here's,
Language of the hands, and this is the model. Another one.
Oh, it's right there. Yeah.
And these two are very big rivals, by the way. Same ballet school, but they're always competing for the solo part. And this is called Maxine, and it's oil gold leaf on wood panel. So we also do oil now. On top of the tempera works, we paint on oil, and we started to go back to actually painting primarily in oil for the larger pieces, simply because we can cover larger territory with oil paint.
And how that piece started, actually?
That's at the Society of Four Arts. We teach there as well as the Boca Museum, and we used to teach here a lot, too, at the Armory. And this is called Rose Rivalry. Those are the two models. Actually, one of the two models you saw. Actually, no, you saw all three of the dancers in those pictures at Armand Bowling. These two are also very big rivals, and we decided to depict that in a painting of them.
And
This one's called Fish Face. And this got us into a really big fight. My son didn't like this painting at all.
Both of
It
them
caused a family conflict.
Both of them marching in my studio and saying, "This is piece."
I didn't say that.
Yes, you did.
But now
I hate that.
No, I like it better
What are you
now.
thinking?
I like it better now. Actually, this part was my contribution because I felt like they made a lot of sense together. This one's called Fish Face, and this one's called Eat, Sleep, Dance, Repeat. And it was sort of the idea of repetition, how you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again to get good at it, whether it's painting or dance. It was about that. Yeah, and that's another one of the ballet dancers from our studio. And this is like what we see every day at the ballet studio, just hanging from the dancers' studios. So it became an inspiration for us. And this dancer with the Nutcracker motif and peacock. And this is the most recent painting that we've done, the last painting we did together. It's called Harmony in White, and it was inspired by, of course, the love of the passion for ballet and also Matisse's abstractions of dance. And it's at the Cultural Council currently. And it's closing soon, actually. I think it's May 18th it comes down. And that's us at the show. And then some of the other pieces, like this one, you can see silver point drawings, and we also do burnished gold drawings, which you can see out in the lobby too, some of them.
Yeah, this technique I discovered by chance. I was just playing around with gold leafing and with the tools, and all of a sudden I just see the potential of being as a drawing. And usually it's totally polished gold and not much of the gradations in gold. Because first of all, it's not easy to do. Once you put the mark, it's it.
It's like silver point. You can't change it.
It's more than silver point.
Right,
It's it. It's done.
You can sand silver point, but you can't
Yes.
change the gold.
The gold leaf, it's once you made a mistake, it's over.
So this is a silver point drawing. You know, Elizabeth, because you do silver point, right? And this is a series called Warriors, where we used antique weapons in some of the pieces.
Idea of kids dealing with contemporary world, and it's a little bit awkwardness and angst and all different feelings what going on in their lives. So it's what we try to depict there.
Yeah, this is Nanchuk.
This is engraved glass. We start again play with shadows. The image is revealing by just shadow.
Some of our prints, and here's where we show them at the Met.
That is display what they have at the mezzanine gallery in Metropolitan Museum.
And I recently went to the Library of Congress to see the prints, and it's a great place to have prints because it's for the people. Anybody can go there. Like you can go there checking out a book. You go in, you can check out prints. You can't take them home, but you can view them. So I recently went back because I wanted to see the prints because I knew that they had bought them, but I never got to see them. And so I went there in person. So one good thing about printmaking that I found, and I tell all my students, that it's a wonderful art form because they're all originals. And if you want to get your work into museums, it's a lot easier than getting paintings into museums because it's an original by you, but yet the price point's a lot better. So it's been really good for us because a lot of museums have our prints.
Yeah, and it's also edition.
But they can't always afford
edition.
the paintings, so it's been really good for our career. The Orlando Museum came to our house recently. It was kind of intimidating having this huge tour bus come up into our little house. We had to clean it up, and our printmaking press is in the garage, so that we had to clean our garage out. That took like a week just to do that. But that's the most recent experience, and it was a nice visit from the museum.
And it was pretty funny. So it was about the audience, like what we have right now over here, and right here is our garage. So everybody looking at our garage.
But we did a printmaking demo, and gave everybody a little print of a bee, so it turned out well. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.